Prior to UFC 317, International Fight Week of 2025, there were 9 former fighters that had become 2-weight world champions in the UFC. And in the aftermath of UFC 317, make it double digits as Ilia Topuria has become the new lightweight champion of the world after taking out Charles Oliveira in what took less than 2.5 minutes time. Let's talk about that brutal knockout, and let's talk about this absolutely insane meteoric rise that Ilia Topuria is having that has many people saying it's arguable and comparable to one Conor McGregor. The Matador out of Spain, 28 years young, 17 victories without a singular defeat on his record, 15 out of 17 by way of knockout, 7 KOs altogether, and 8 submissions. That's right, the guy that's knocked out 3 legends in a row has more submissions on his resume than knockouts. And Ilia Topuria has done it once more. He has become a 2-weight world champion. He took out Charles Oliveira in 2 minutes and 27 seconds with a vicious combo that started with a left jab, brought the right hook that sent Charles down, and on his way down, Ilia caught him with another left, and then finished it off with some ground and pound strikes before poor Mark Goddard could step in to stop the action. Damn it! Charles Oliveira! No! But actually, this finish left me speechless. Me and my friends all gathered around watching this together, and afterward, obviously, everyone's a Charles Oliveira fan. Not that we're haters of Ilia Topuria, but of course it hurt to see him go down like that. But we were left just sitting there like, how is that somehow anticlimactic? And I guess it's because Ilia Topuria spoiled what he was going to do. He told every single one of us, the millions of MMA fans in this world, that he was going to finish Charles Oliveira in a knockout fashion in the first round, and that's exactly what he did. And now this 3-fight stretch has everybody talking. Is it the greatest 3-fight run in UFC history? You're going to be hard-pressed, especially in recent memory, to find a better one, in my opinion, because it started at UFC 298 in February of last year, where he got that title shot opportunity against Alexander the Great Volkanovski, and he took his head off 3 minutes and 32 seconds into the second round. He follows that up, Ilia Topuria, of course, with his first title defense at 145 pounds. Has a pretty back-and-forth bout with Max Holloway, albeit, but in that third round, 1 minute and 34 seconds in, he became the first man to ever knock out Max Holloway, who prior to that had absorbed over 3,700 strikes and never been put away like he was against Ilia. Then he vacates his title in an attempt to chase greatness and dethrone Islam Makhachev. We of course know that Islam Makhachev is also, well, not in past tense anymore. He has vacated his lightweight title that now belongs to Ilia, and he will be moving up to 170 to chase a second title in his own right. So instead, we saw Ilia Topuria get matched up with the former champion and all-time leader in finishes, all-time leader in bonuses, and all-time leader in submissions in UFC history, Charles "Do Bronx" Oliveira, and he knocks him out in the very first round. Are you kidding me? That 3-fight run is unfathomable. Go before that, he starches Josh Emmett in a 25-minute fight where he has a 50-42 scorecard. Before that, he destroys Bryce Mitchell and submits him, someone who is known for his submission skills. All in all, he's now 8-0 in the UFC, and it's truly something that is nearly unprecedented outside of someone like Conor McGregor, truthfully. And shout out to Aaron Bronstetter, my absolute favorite MMA journalist in the fight game. He said, the age when becoming a double champion. Conor McGregor, 28 years, 4 months, and 10 days. Ilia Topuria, 28 years, 4 months, and 21 days. It is absolutely insane, the career comparisons that they've had up until this point of their careers. Obviously, we know that Conor McGregor likely is never going to fight again, but what he did at a certain point in the UFC was unlike anything we had ever seen, and somehow Ilia Topuria is rivaling that. Now, of course, we know Conor McGregor wasn't undefeated heading into his blood feud with Khabib Nurmagomedov in what would be the biggest fight in UFC's history. He would have that big loss to Nate Diaz, then run it back in the rematch and have their rivalry together. And of course, you got to sprinkle in the loss that he had in boxing against Floyd Money Mayweather. But Conor would go on to have that big-time feud against someone that there was true legitimate hatred toward with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I'd say Khabib reciprocated that same energy as well.
Irish, only 6 million. Russian, 150 million. I want to fight with your chicken because this is #1 easy fight in lightweight division.
This is #1 bullshit.
And now it seems that in the aftermath of UFC 317, Ilia Topuria is going to get that same blood feud, that hatred-filled feud, and it's going to be against the Scouser, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. Any hand sanitizer companies out there, get your sponsorship dollars ready.
When I saw him last time, he got an hand sanitizer bottle bounced off his foot. What'll you do? You'll do nothing. You'll do nothing, you little fart. Go and sit back down.
I don't think he gets the balls to face me and close himself in the octagon with me, so him.
That's right. Not only is Paddy Pimblett and Ilia Topuria a combined 15-0 in the UFC since their respective debuts, but they have a little bit of a disliking toward one another, if I do say so myself, dating back years at this point, and now it's all come full circle. UFC 317, the post-fight interview, Joe Rogan couldn't wait to pander his eyes over to Paddy Pimblett in the front row, call him up into the octagon, even though Dana White did not like that idea.
Well, I don't know who the hell let him in there. That should have never happened. Let's start there. I was already back in my room, or that would have never happened, but...
And it seems all but certain that we are going to see this fight happen. I'm not saying that heading into UFC 317, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility, but when you factor in Justin Gaethje recently saying that he did the UFC a favor back at UFC 300, then beat Rafael Fiziev and felt that he was owed a title shot. When you factor in Arman Tsarukyan missing out on his title shot against Islam Makhachev at UFC 311, but then being brought in to get back into the good graces of the UFC by being the backup fighter of Topuria and Oliveira and successfully making that weight, may I add. But instead, we're going to see the number 8 ranked Paddy Pimblett, which keep your eyes on that ranking come Tuesday morning. I could see the media members making a little bit of a shuffle to scurry him up the rankings just a little bit more. Gonna be taking on Ilia Topuria in what will be Topuria's first lightweight title defense. This is crazy. This has the makings of one of the biggest fights in recent memory for the UFC, one of the biggest fights in the lightweight division's history. I'm by no means saying it's going to rival what Conor and Khabib did. I don't think that'll ever be outdone. But dare I say, this would be just as big from an eyeballs perspective as Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. Is that too crazy to say? This one is going to catch the hardcore MMA fans' eyes and the casual MMA fans' eyes, and those are the type of fights that the UFC salivates at the opportunity to get. And yes, I said Paddy's ranked number 8, and I made it sound borderline wrong that he could be next for the title. But if you look at his run, I'd say he's earned it over his last 3 bouts. He beat Tony Ferguson at the end of 2023. He finished Bobby King Green in the first round in less than 3.5 minutes. And then he ran through Michael Chandler at UFC 314 in April like a hot knife through butter before finishing him via TKO in round number 3. He's 30 years old, right in his prime, 23-3 overall with 17 finishes. And not only does he put on great performances over progressively harder opponents in the octagon, but outside of the octagon, the guy knows how to build a fight and hype up people to get them invested, whether they love Paddy or hate him or doubt him or any mixture of the three. And Ilia Topuria has taken the world by storm over the last couple of years. We talked about the 3-fight run that he's on currently, and if he goes on to take on Paddy Pimblett and run through him and give him the first loss of his UFC career, he just continues to catapult himself into superstardom. I'm talking rocket strapped to the back, sent straight to the moon. But the exact same thing can be said for Paddy Pimblett, because if he comes in and backs up all of the talk, all of the hand sanitizer boy talk, remains undefeated in his own right in the UFC while handing Ilia Topuria not only his first UFC loss, but his first loss in general, he's also going to be launched straight to the moon. This is everything the UFC wants and more, in my opinion. And honestly, even from a hardcore fan's perspective, I've seen worse title shots given than what it would be for Paddy Pimblett. After all, we talked about the 3-fight run. All in all, 7-0 in the UFC, the finishing prowess that he has, it makes sense. It simply just does. Which means that we got to do Arman Tsarukyan and Justin Gaethje in the meantime, which is the fight that I've been calling for a while at this point on social media, if I'm being honest with you. And especially if Islam Makhachev is not going to be in this division, we're seeing Dustin Poirier retire next month after he takes on Max Holloway. The only other people out there with a potential shot at the gold belt that is wrapped around Ilia's waist is Max Holloway, but I'm not necessarily clamoring to see that rematch just yet. So what do you think? Are we going to see Paddy Pimblett versus Ilia Topuria? And if we do, odds are it's going to be at a big card. Dare I say, Madison Square Garden in November, people? But if you disagree and you don't want to see Topuria versus Paddy, or at least you don't want to see it next, and you want to see Paddy get one more fight to truly solidify himself as a title contender, then who do you pair up Ilia with? Is it Arman Tsarukyan, or is it Justin Gaethje? And then I think it's pretty clear that whichever of those two would fight Ilia, the other would then take on Paddy Pimblett. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that war room in the UFC headquarters on Tuesday morning to hear what Dana White and the boys have to say about this, but instead, I'm turning it over to you all. Give me your thoughts down below. And now that we are done with the main event discussion, let's jump into another dominant fighter and another dominant champion. Alexandre Pantoja continues to cement himself as the second greatest flyweight of all time behind the Mighty Mouse, Demetrius Johnson. And although he's behind him in terms of title fights and title defenses, the man is surpassing him in multiple categories. That's right, Pantoja does tail Demetrius Johnson by 7. 12 all-time title fight wins, 11 title defenses for Mighty Mouse versus 5 title fight wins and 4 title defenses for Alexandre Pantoja. However, Pantoja has now surpassed Demetrius Johnson in all 3 of the listed categories. Most flyweight wins, 14, most flyweight finishes, 8, and most flyweight submissions with 6. So yeah, it's going to be hard for Pantoja to truly catch Mighty Mouse in terms of those 7 title fights that separate the two, just being that his age is already 35, and there's only so many people that he can fight right now at flyweight. But damn it, man, when you have all of those other accolades, how can you not be in this discussion for the greatest flyweight of all time? I'm obviously not saying that he's better than Mighty Mouse. Mighty Mouse is truly one of the best we've ever seen, but all of this is to say that Alexandre Pantoja has more than enough proved that he should be given his flowers by the MMA community. And I start the discussion by saying all of this because, well, if you didn't know, now you know. At UFC 317, Alexandre Pantoja ran through Kai Kara-France en route to a 3rd round submission win and a 4th consecutive ruby on that gold belt of his. Kai Kara-France had a very good takedown defensive rate over the course of his career heading into this fight with Pantoja, and that was what I was most intrigued by seeing in this fight, is if that would hold up against someone as elite as Alexandre. We now have learned in the hindsight that it did not, because in round 1, Pantoja took him down in the opening minute, if I'm not mistaken, and kept him there. In round 3, he took him down and held him there up until the finish happened at 1 minute and 55 seconds in. That put Kara-France to sleep, and in round 2, he wasn't able to get KKF down, Pantoja that is, but he competed with him more than comfortably on the feet. That's now 8 wins in a row for Pantoja, his 2nd win over Kai Kara-France dating back 9 years ago to The Ultimate Fighter, and he's beaten Brandon Moreno 3 times, he's beaten Brandon Royval 2 times, he's literally wiped the division clean, but lucky enough for him, he has a very clear-cut #1 contender waiting in the wings. And that is none other than Joshua Van, who at 23 years young is already 8-1 in the UFC, just competed in the fight of the year versus Brandon Royval at UFC 317. One fight before Pantoja would walk through the curtain to defend his title, and Van would go through the fire and come out the victor and move from number 12 all the way up to number 1 in the world come Tuesday morning after taking down the Raw Dog Royval. It was an absolute all-time classic for the flyweight division between Brandon Royval and Joshua Van, and mind you, Van took this fight on 21 days' notice. He just fought at UFC 316 3 weeks ago and knocked out Bruno Silva to put himself into the top 15 of flyweight. And not only was this fight absolutely insane, not only did Joshua Van become the rightful winner and the rightful #1 contender at flyweight, but it was a record-breaking fight between him and Raw Dog, as they both would land over 200 significant strikes each. 204 for Joshua Van, 215 for Brandon Royval, and in total they would throw 779 total strikes, and 772 of them were significant. What a fight. And you could argue that it was 1-1 heading into that third round, but then Joshua Van laid the shot that solidified him that third round and solidified him the 29-28 and even a 30-27 on the third scorecard in this one, as he would knock Brandon Royval down in the final 10 seconds and again cement himself as the next challenger to Alexandre Pantoja's seemingly impossible to gain throne. And what was awesome is that much like the main event where Ilia Topuria got to go face-to-face in the octagon with Paddy Pimblett, we got to see Joshua Van enter the octagon literally just, essentially probably about 45 minutes to an hour after he went through an all-time war with Brandon Royval, and he got to stand face-to-face, toe-to-toe with Pantoja. And it's highly possible that we see these two fight at the end of the year card in December. That is where Alexandre Pantoja defended his belt last year when he welcomed in Kai Asakura to the UFC and submitted him in the second round. And now it could be the same spot again 1 year later, welcoming in Joshua Van to title contention status in this flyweight division. That fight has all the makings to be an absolute barn burner because Joshua Van, to his credit, much like Kai France, has historically good takedown defense, but things just seem to get a little bit harder when you're going up against the cannibal that is Alexandre Pantoja. So there's so many questions going into that fight on if Joshua Van is being thrown into all of this too much too soon. I thought personally heading into this fight with Royval that it was, and he proved me wrong. So maybe, just maybe, he could become what would probably be the second youngest champion in UFC history behind Jon Jones if he can dethrone Alexandre Pantoja. Because again, he's 23 right now. I believe he turns 24 in October. So if the fight happens in December, a freshly turned 24-year-old Joshua Van versus 35-year-old Alexandre Pantoja, an 11-year age gap, all signs would point toward Joshua Van being able to dethrone Pantoja. But Pantoja fight by fight is now proving that that narrative is becoming more and more false, at least for the stories of his career. So I want to hear your thoughts on the title defense of Alexandre Pantoja and that near perfect performance and shutout that he had against Kai France, paired with the Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval fight, down in the comments below. And what are your way too early predictions for how Pantoja versus Van will play out, hopefully when we see it at the end of the year? And now that we are done with the UFC 317 title fight discussions, let's jump into the rest of the card because we've got some other big performances and bounce backs to talk about. And speaking of bounce backs, let's go to the lightweight division where Beneil Dariush ended his two-fight skid, righted the ship with a win over the money man, Renato Moicano. Beneil Dariush entered UFC 317 on the heels of back-to-back knockout losses to Arman Tsarukyan and Charles Oliveira, and you can pair that with what happened to him at UFC 311, where he had the rug pulled out from under him in a fight with Renato Moicano due to Arman Tsarukyan injuring his back, being pulled from the title fight with Islam Makhachev, Renato Moicano being pulled from his fight with Beneil and inserted into the title fight with Islam Makhachev, which left Beneil Dariush having made weight but without a fight in January. But the fight was rebooked, and he would see his matchup with Moicano come to fruition this past weekend in an International Fight Week, and it did not come easy, this bounce-back win, because in round number 1, Renato Moicano would knock down Beneil Dariush with just a few seconds to go in the round and pounce on him with some ground and pound. Luckily, Beneil was able to garner his wits about him and keep the fight going up until the stools would come into play at the end of the first, and then he would recover quite nicely and gas out Renato Moicano over rounds 2 and 3 and grapple his way to a decision win, his first victory since October of 2022 when he defeated Mateusz Gamrot. So this was a must-win fight for Beneil, who had no momentum whatsoever heading into UFC 317, and now the 36-year-old will hold his spot in the top 10, is back in the win column, and still is right there in the borderline elite discussions of the lightweight division that is changing month by month essentially at this point. Obviously, we know that Ilia is the new champion. Dustin Poirier is getting ready to retire next month. Gaethje's hinting toward retirement. Arman Tsarukyan's up there at the top. Paddy Pimblett's going to challenge Ilia Topuria. Obviously, Charles Oliveira lost his title fight at UFC 317 to Ilia Topuria. So what is going to be next for someone like a Beneil Dariush? Could it be a fight with a Dan Hooker? Could it be a fight even with Charles Oliveira, a rematch a couple years in the making? I wouldn't necessarily lean toward that rematch with Charles. Maybe we could see a world where if Max Holloway loses to Dustin Poirier next month, he could get the Max Holloway fight. I'm not quite sure. Maybe just take a month here to let the division play out a little bit. Maybe he fights a Rafael Fiziev. Maybe he even fights Dan Hooker. There's definitely options. But with that big fight happening and a changing of the situation and circumstances of lightweight on this night and at UFC 318 next month with Poirier versus Holloway, let's just relax, wait and see. Then we can have a better, clearer picture of how to matchmake everyone else outside of those top 3 guys. The RoboCop Gregory Rodrigues bounced back in an absolutely massive way. Oh my Lord, have mercy. I think he secured the most brutal knockout of 2025 so far. Maybe not knockout of the year, but find me one that was more brutal than this one.
Desplazando.
He absolutely starched Jack Hermansson in what was Hermansson's first fight since February of 2024 in his win over Joe Pyfer. He had to go under the knife for some surgery and heal up some injuries over the last year and a half, and what a terrible way to come back and get beaten by the RoboCop that is Gregory Rodrigues, and the follow-up shots, dare I say, were even worse than the knockout itself. This was absolutely vicious. And it proved that Gregory Rodrigues is still right there on the outside looking in at the top 15, because let us not forget, in February, he got launched into the top 10 against former title challenger Jared Cannonier much too soon, and it showed in a fight where he would ultimately be finished in the 4th round by the veteran Cannonier. But this one was big, because Jack Hermansson is a long-time seasoned veteran and a perennial top 10 guy prior to his hiatus over the last year and a half in this middleweight division. So I wouldn't be surprised one bit if Gregory Rodrigues gets a crack to jump into the top 15 again in this middleweight division. It's just a matter of who's going to be available and how high up the UFC wants to risk putting him again, because he's already faltered once. You can't really risk that happening a second time. So I look for a little bit of a slower push this go around, but still he could fight a Roman Kopylov or Paulo Costa winner the next month at UFC 318. He could fight an Abus Magomedov. There are definitely options, and I'm curious to hear what you think should be next for the RoboCop down below. Jose Delgado versus Hyder Amil had all the makings to be a fight of the night contender. Dare I say, it wouldn't have competed with what Royval and Van put on, but it would have been fun. But instead, Jose Delgado robbed us of that opportunity and just decided to finish Hyder Amil in 26 seconds. This guy landed a nasty knee right up the middle in the clinch that sent Hyder Amil back first to the canvas, out cold. It was a beautiful, beautiful knockout. And Jose Delgado, at 27 years young, is 10-1 with a 100% finish rate, 6 knockouts, 4 submissions, 2-0 in the UFC, following his Dana White Contender Series fight in August of 2024. Prior to that, he was in the LFA. He was in Tough Enough. The guy is legit in this featherweight division. He's fast, he's long, he's rangy, he's precise, and clearly he's powerful with a lot of different weapons on the feet. Just ask Hyder Amil, who was undefeated heading into this fight at 11-0. I'm not saying Delgado's getting a ranked featherweight in his 3rd UFC fight, but if he wins that 3rd one, he's not far from it. This guy's someone to keep your eyes on, and maybe at the end of the year, he could be in the Newcomer of the Year conversation for 2025. Our 3rd bounce-back win of the night belonged to Tracy Cortez, as she recovered from her first UFC loss to Rose Namajunas last summer by defeating Viviane Araujo, the longtime battle-tested veteran in this women's flyweight division, who was ranked number 8. Cortez was ranked number 10, and come Tuesday morning, Tracy will break into that flyweight top 10 for the first time, and she is still 31 years old, right in her prime, 12-2 overall, 6-1 in the UFC. And while she still hasn't had that one true solidifying performance that really has her in the discussions with the elite of the elite in the flyweight division, this is definitely a step in the right direction to right the wrongs and get herself into the top 10. I'm very curious to see how the UFC will look to matchmake Tracy moving forward, because this women's flyweight division is the best division in all of the UFC for the women right now. I'm still pretty confident that Valentina Shevchenko is going to have the super fight against Zhang Weili for the flyweight championship. Natalia Silva's number 1, undefeated in the UFC. Manon Fior's coming off of the loss to Valentina Shevchenko. Alexa Grasso's coming off of the loss to Natalia Silva. Actually, you know what? that might be the fight. Let's do this. If we get the super fight between Zhang Weili and Valentina Shevchenko, let's do Natalia Silva versus Erin Blanchfield, since Erin didn't get her opportunity to face Macy Barber at their main event at the end of May. We can have Jasmine Jasudavicius fight either Manon Fior or Alexa Grasso. Then we can have Tracy Cortez fight whoever Jasmine doesn't fight between Manon and Alexa Grasso. Bada bing, bada boom. Terrance McKinney has 24 professional fights in his career. 21 of them have not gone outside of the first round. The most electric fighter in the UFC today, T-Rex, is now 17-7 with a 100% finish rate as he ran through Slaviclaus Viacheslav Borshchev in the first round in less than a minute, 55 seconds to be exact, as he picked him up, slammed him down, and locked in the guillotine choke submission. Hey, T-Rex has now won 4 of his last 5 bouts. It's time to start putting some respect on McKinney's name, man, because he's starting to put it all together. He's cleaning up his performances. He's keeping himself out of danger, but still keeping that same finishing prowess and aggression that he has. It's quite an interesting dynamic that he's carrying with him right now, but dare I say one more win, and he's right there fighting a top 15 lightweight. And last but not least, Jacobe Smith kept his perfect record intact. He is now 11-0 with 9 finishes, and he made history, at least for himself, by picking up the first submission win of his career as he took out the veteran Niko Price in what was a dominant performance. He destroyed him in that first round, beat him up real bad with his striking and ground and pound, and then more of the same in the second round, but would lead to the submission win instead of the TKO win 4 minutes and 3 seconds in. And that's only the second man to ever submit Niko Price, so this was quite the performance from Jacobe. I will say I got a little hesitant. It seemed that he was getting maybe just a tad bit tired, but he was able to clean it up and get the finish win after Niko Price did land some successful shots sprinkled in that second round. And much like Jose Delgado, come the end of 2025, assuming Smith can get a third fight this year, he could be in the running for Newcomer of the Year as well, because he made his UFC debut back in January with a knockout over Preston Parsons, and he's also a 2024 alum of Dana White Contender Series. So that is it for the UFC 317 recap. Man, what a weekend it was. International Fight Week never fails to deliver for us fight fans, and I want to hear all of your thoughts from fight number 11 to fight number 1 down in the comments below. Give me your biggest takeaways, matchmake for all of the biggest winners and losers on this card moving forward, and everything in between. I want to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, as we continue to chase the goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers in 2025. Any and all support is extremely appreciated. Alongside recaps of all of the most meaningful results from every card, I also break down the biggest and best fights from an X's and O's, and more importantly, storyline perspective heading into each card, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platform if you're a fan of long-form podcast episodes that I have everything all in one place. Episodes released there every Monday and Friday. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.